Can you remember back 7 months ago? Well, that's when the fabrication work on this roll cage began. So fast forward until today, we are going to find out whether or not it works. Finally.
Garage time.
All right, obviously the roll cage is designed for safety, and I'm not going to roll my car over to test it, but it's also for performance. And I've done sort of equal performance, equal safety on this roll cage, even though it's only a half cage. So today I'm going to be repeating the torsional rigidity test to determine, is the cage actually making the chassis stronger? To be honest, I'm a little nervous about how this is going to come out. You know, I've done other projects in this last 7 months on this car and fitted a few things in, but this is a big one, and sometimes you just have to try new things and learn for yourself. So in last week's episode, I had made the diagonal bars. They go across the front door, and off camera, I made the second one. So now I can try torsional rigidity test with and without the bars, so I can learn if the rear cage does anything. Also, at the end of last week's episode, I asked you guys if you thought that the improvement in torsional rigidity would be significant. And one person responded, Grant, he said 10%, I think 10% for the rolled cage, and I think 5% for the door bars. Okay, here you can see the roll bars. Everything's painted black, so it's pretty dark. But this is just a half cage, and the main hoop is really situated just about even with this torsion bar hole. And that just so happens to be right where I'm doing the measurement of the torsional rigidity test. I'm supporting the rear of the car right on the torsion bar attachments in the rear. So it's hard to believe that the twisting which occurs between these torsion bar mounts and the front of the car is really going to show up in the test results. The one thing that I do think will improve it, as the front twist and it transfers some of that twisting motion to the roof is supported here by these speed hole plates, and these plates extend down to like the top of the doors and also there into the roof structure. So my thought is, if anything's going to help it, it's going to be this connection between the B-pillar and the roll cage. So Grant guessed 10% on the roll cage. I think it might be a little less than that because it's so far away from the measurement point. Now theoretically it doesn't matter where the torque is applied, but I am measuring the chassis twist between the rear torsion bars and the front suspension mounts. So as those two twist relative to each other, I think the rear cage is only good for 5%. Okay, here's a quick refresher on how this test works. I am attaching this bar to the front suspension mounts, and that puts a known torque on the chassis, and it's not going to harm the chassis at all. It's within its elastic range. So I extend the bar out from the side of the car. It mounts underneath here. So back here you can see the rear of the car is supported by this jack stand, and it's not supported on the spring plate or the rubber bushing. It's actually supported on the housing, which is a rigid bolted connection to the car. So this should eliminate any of the rubber flexing. And of course the wheels are off the ground on both sides. Okay, so here is the measurement setup. So I have this dial indicator placed on just a metal plate here, and it is attached or touching this bar with a mark on here from the exact time I did this before, and it's located just directly underneath this front suspension arm. So when I apply weight to the end of this bar over here, it's going to pull the front of the chassis down. It's going to deflect it down, and then this indicator will record how many thousandths of an inch that the car actually bends or twists. And that's the number we're interested in. For a given amount of weight, how much does it actually deflect? Oh, and by the way, Grant, I think that the door bars, which aren't on yet, are going to be maybe more than 5%. I'm going to give the door bars 10%. So I'm taking your numbers and just flipping them around. Okay, the first thing I noticed when I just put a little bit of weight on this bar, I can see how the relationship between the hood and the fender is changing. So when the chassis twists, you can see that the hood, because it's latched right now, the hood is twisting relative to the body, or the other way around. Maybe the body's twisting relative to the hood. But either way, I can see a great big change in the door gap or the hood gap by just pushing a little bit here on the front. Now this is pretty severe test because most of the loads on the front of the suspension are at the rear of the arm. So this is really not a very fair test, but it is the most extreme test and it gives me the best reading on the gauge. And I started doing the test this way, so I'm going to finish it. But for the sake of fairness, I'm going to lift up the hood because the hood on the last time, it wasn't latched. It wasn't actually even in place. So if you just saw me do that, it's really difficult to get your hand in between the bumper. In fact, the bumper was bending down a little bit and this latch. So a future project is going to be to modify this catch, this release, so I can get my hand in there because that is not fun. Here you go, finally a good use for a selfie stick. You measure your suspension with it. Okay, so now we just load it up. These are each 40 pounds, and they're right there on the end of the bar. There's 2. There's 3. And there's 4. So that will put some twist in the chassis, and it's just a matter of measuring it out and doing some math. Those 4 data points have been plotted here on this chart, and there's a line fitted to those 4 data points, and of course it's in a line. This is the amount of force here in pounds, so I went up to about 160 pounds with those 4 bags. And then over here is the deflection in thousandths of an inch. And this has been converted with some calculations to an actual angle of deflection versus the amount of load applied. And there is a measurable difference between these 2 diagonal lines, and it just so happens to be 9%. So Grant, you were right on the money, and I'm really happy for you, but I'm also happy for the car. This is a really good result. So now I'm going to add the door bars in and see what they do. Okay, these are both bolted down in tight. It's a bolted joint, but it's also augmented by those interlocking features, and they're actually tapered. It's kind of a lot of work put into those, but I think this is going to help too. Okay, let's do it again. One. 2. There's 3. There's 4. So let's see how this does. Okay, here are the torsional rigidity results for the door bars, and there's the 3rd line. You can see it's lower, not as significant as I thought, and the percentage turns out to be 4.3. So Grant was right on both measurements. I think that's really cool. Congratulations on that. Send me your t-shirt size. I'm gonna send you a t-shirt in the mail. I personally was a little disappointed in the door bars. I sort of envisioned they would do more, but it is what it is, and I'll take everything I can get. So that we picked up another like 13% improvement in torsional rigidity due to those modifications. So from the seam welding to everything that's done today, that's a pretty substantial increase in chassis stiffness, and I'm excited to get the car on the road to see if I can actually feel the difference. Speaking of modifications, I have nothing else planned for the actual body or chassis of this car, so I am going to work 100% now on getting it painted. So it's going to be a little boring, but it's got to get done. I've really prolonged a lot of the sanding, as you know. But I really have nothing else planned. Of course, there's going to be modifications on things that bolt on, but this is what I believe to be the platform that I want. This platform, as the car as it is today, is going to allow me to keep building and building and building upon it. Check out that mouth. That's a mouth with a purpose. I cut a little scoop out of the front latch panels so that air can go through the oil cooler and not be obstructed by the actual chassis. So this will allow better airflow to go out underneath the car. So a few weeks ago, I had walled in this section of my bumper. This is the rear bumper on the passenger side, and to make it made up with my custom bumperettes and this steel license plate panel, I walled this section off, and it took a long time for the fiberglass to dry. So I'm just checking it out now.